going on, everybody? I am excited to present to you today for the second time. Uh, it's really the first time, but I absolutely borked the recording last time. It's all on me. We had this great conversation for a hour and a half. I was like, this is so, we're like, we hit so many good things that people are going to love. And it was just like silent, no audio. So
You
take
saw
two.
you saw the hand movements.
May I present Matthew Sanabria, one of my good friends. We met like basically the first day I was at HashiCorp. He happened to be in the San Francisco office for kind of like my orientation, although he started before me. Um, and we've sort of like worked together and just sort of been friends ever since, griping about the same things, excited about the same things, occasionally building the same things or two different ends of the same thing, like we just were. Um, Matthew, do you want to tell them just very quickly about just at HashiCorp, like kind of the path you've taken? Because I think that's like an interesting thing. And then later we can talk about, how
Yeah,
you got into all this and that
that's
stuff.
perfect. Yeah. When I came to HashiCorp, I was an SRE, and I came into HashiCorp as a support engineer because I was trying to pivot more into software, and like the support engineer opening was a good way to kind of do that. I spent my first year at HashiCorp doing support engineering work for Terraform. Learned so much about the product, and then from there, I just started contributing to Terraform Enterprise, Terraform Cloud, and people were like, "Oh, you know how to write software?" And I was like, "Yeah," and I would like to do it more. And that's kind of
That's
how
actually why I'm here.
yeah,
Like for
yeah,
those who maybe worked with us, like Matthew he's being incredibly humble here, but he was massively overqualified from day one, and like it was very obvious
yeah,
um, that like this was part of a larger play to switch kind of these career ladders within. I mean, it is kind of almost already a narrow like niche, but even within that,
yep.
I think it can be hard. It's the same switch that I have made over the last year and a half. Um,
It's a
and
necessary switch.
yeah,
Honestly,
uh,
I'm gonna open my
say more
window.
about that. I'm interested to when you get back. Say more about that. He just walked off. I think this is the mic drop. I think
Nope,
he's done.
sorry. I just wanted to open my window because I was like, it's so dark in here and it's so bright outside. So I was like, let me just get some natural light in here.
Yeah, do
But
it.
yeah, no, it's you're right. Like I was overqualified for the role, and like pivoting in this field is so difficult, right? Like you
Yeah,
have to like either do what I did and kind of take like a title drop per se, and then like kind of pivot back up,
yeah,
or you have to pivot at the same company, right? You have to like find that opening within your company and pivot to that. But like switching roles and pivoting is hard because like companies, they see you always as your past self, right? I always had that
yeah.
like infrastructure label on me because like, oh, you did SRE, you did DevOps, you did this, you did
Hmm.
that. Like you're an infra person, and that label kind of just like stuck with me. And rewriting that label and like I always tell people like there's this phrase that everyone likes to say, like people don't change. It's like, no, people do change. What doesn't change is people's perceptions of other people. And like I had the perception that I was an infrastructure person, and
Yeah.
like getting people to reevaluate their perception of me was difficult, right? Like so they could start seeing me less as an infrastructure person and more as a software person. Like that was hard, and that's why I
I
kind of
think
did that pivot.
you did a really good job of that. Like I know I think we talked early on, and I knew that's where you were trying to go. And I think I shared with you at some point, it's like software is the whole reason I got into tech. Like I love programming and I wrote Python, and it was just sort of like, I think, especially someone like me, less formal education, just not educated about the field, you're just more likely to think of tech as sort of a one blob of like jobs. And oh, it's probably easy to switch around in there. And you kind of don't even understand which specific thread you're going to start unraveling if you go like I did for a sysadmin gig, or like server admin, and how actually like segregated or sort of isolated that often is from the software world. That there's the kind of these invisible, I wouldn't say glass
Yeah.
ceilings, but certain like invisible fences where you're like, geez, it's just really hard with like Linux on my resume to get like a regular old software job.
Yep. It is because it's a twofold problem, and we spoke about this last time. But like when we were entering the workforce, like when we were new to the workforce, Linux skills were in really high demand. Like
Yeah.
if you knew Linux, you were like, hey, bro, come here. Like I got you, right? Oh, you know the terminal? Great. I have a job for you. And now that
Yeah.
like those skills went from being like oh my god, this is a rare thing, to being like I expect everyone to have those skills.
Yeah.
but that label still follows you. It's like, oh, you know Linux well? Great. So then you must not want to do software. You might want to just do Linux things. It's like, no, I want to do software. It's like, but you say Linux. Yeah, yeah, but that's where my software runs. I know both sides, right? I know how to
Yeah,
write the software and I know how to get it running. I don't like freeze up when I have an error. I'm not one of those developers where it's like something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. I'm like, no, I'm diving in because
yeah.
I
We've
can
got a
help.
reader alert.
Yeah.
Someone reads the error message. That could be dangerous. You might actually solve the
You
problem that you caused.
you'll be so surprised. I mean, how many people don't even read the error message? They're like, hey, I need help with this. And the error message
Yeah,
literally says like, name not resolved or
yeah,
like file not found, like super clear messaging. And they're like, I have no idea how to proceed. And I'm like, did you by any chance read the message like top to bottom first?
yeah. I
There.
think there is. It's like everything you just talked about is like part of the problem, and our industry thinks it's so fast, but it's actually so slow. And it's kind of one of the funny things about it is like everyone thinks they're on the cutting edge, but like every
No,
fucking
you're not.
idea you hear is like 40 years old.
Yep.
And the companies are kind of the same. They think they're on the bleeding edge, but really they're making mistakes that we've known for 20 years are mistakes. And one of those things is like, how long did it take for like the DevOps thing to catch on? And then it caught on as a fucking job role of all things, which is like not the point,
Yep.
but exactly this like unification of skills in an engineer where it's like, yeah, your infrastructure people, even if they only touch infrastructure, should be approaching it from a software kind of perspective. And that's what like all this Google SRE stuff is about. And your software people, likewise, should not get real scared when they see an error message or a system problem or
That
have to
brings
work
them like
in a
lower to
shell
the stack.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because like, what good is a developer that can't like, I don't know, like make a Docker container in 4 lines? You know what I mean? It's like,
I'm in agreement there, right? Like it's sad because we have good software people that have no
yeah,
idea about infrastructure. We
yeah,
have good infrastructure people that have no idea about software.
yeah,
And like the people that are in the middle that actually can do both sides, they're often overlooked because they're seen as like, oh, you're not good enough in the infra, you're not good enough in the software. But it's like even your best software person I'm better than, or even your best
yeah,
infra person I'm better than. And I
yeah,
know both. So like why am I not getting compensated
yeah,
correctly for those things? I have those skills and yeah, it's interesting out there with that. And I agree. I've seen developers that like you can't even spin up a Docker container, right? Have no idea. Like you are writing a network service, sir. You are writing an
yeah,
API to be consumed over
yeah.
the network, and you don't know how DNS works, and you don't know
Yes.
how a
Oh,
packet
that's not
moves.
even rare. Yeah.
What do
Like
you mean?
troubleshooting network problems is like, if I could have a nickel for every like software engineer who I've seen who just like flails at the first sign of like DNS or like network caching or the fact that like pinging something is actually ICMP and it's not like TCP necessarily.
Just because your ICMP packets get there doesn't mean
Exactly.
that other ones will.
It's so yeah, a couple things like that where it's like really just spending like a week on this stuff at any point in your career kind of give you like a superpower. And it's not because you're so great at networking or
Yeah,
anything, it's because you don't suck as bad as everyone else. And not to be too negative here. Speaking of not being too negative, this is the perfect place to pitch the thing I'm doing, which I waited until 1.5 hours last time to do.
perfect.
I'm actually writing a book with a good friend of mine about uh, like Linux and like systems knowledge, like kind of Unix, Linux, shell, command line
Yeah,
skills for software developers, because this is such an incredibly widespread problem that I've seen like throughout the entire industry at every company I've been at. And like really just, I'm not kidding, like a couple 100-page book. It's not like a become a system administrator manual because a lot of Linux books are like that. It is just like shell CLI like skills and concepts, just the ones you need to know to like be really effective. And you would be shocked how few things you need to know to actually become quite, like have a workable skill set that's like, far and above the
I
average
agree.
developer.
I agree. I think first of all, good, good that you're doing that. Happy
Link in the
to
description
read.
bell.
Exactly.
Thank you,
I'll be
Matthew.
happy
Matthew's
to
going to
to
punch me in
review
the face next time we
chapters.
see him.
Yeah, I'll be happy to review chapters and read it and all of that because I
Thank
agree
you.
with you. Right. Couple points there. When I was in support working with people, right, I had to get on calls with people who were senior cloud architects with 17
Oh yeah.
certifications in their email signatures and blah blah blah. Oh, like Linux system admin plus plus plus. And I'm like, okay, great. And we're on the call troubleshooting, and I was like, hey, can you change into the Etsy directory? Can you run ls? Can you do this? Like, and they didn't know how to do that. Right? They didn't know how to do the most basic of the basic things. And I'm like, sir, your title says senior like systems engineer. You have Linux certs on your email signature, and you don't know how to ls, right? And you don't know like how to move around the terminal. I'm like, why are you here? And I'm not trying to be mean and put people down, but like when you're holding a certain title, I'm
Yeah.
going to hold you to a certain level, right? Against that title, I'm going to hold you to that
Yeah.
level. And I was
It's
just
not
shocked.
crazy. It's not a crazy expectation to have. And again, I agree. We're not like poo-pooing people here, but it's like if something's your job and you just like can't do it, you should probably learn to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to have a very hard and frustrating time at your job. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
tell everyone, like, whether you're a software engineer, infrastructure, or whatever you are, you should be able to move at the speed of like a normal conversation, right? I should be able to talk to you,
Okay.
Dave, like, and say like, hey, you're sharing your screen. All right, cd into Etsy, ls, rename this file, edit that file. You should be able to move at that speed. Same thing with software. You create an array, put 3 elements in the array, iterate over the array, right? Like, those are things you should be able to move at the speed of like a normal conversation. Granted, I know not everyone types quickly, but those thought processes should be there for you
That's a
already.
great standard. Can I just say I haven't heard that before? I think that's a great standard to have. I would call that like agility, maybe,
Yeah.
with like your shell environment, your operating system, your language of choice. I think that's one of the reasons. I don't know if you want to say this publicly, but as someone who has passed Google interviews, I think that's one of the reasons that I gather that they use not an IDE for um, like you writing down your ideas as code. They still want you to write it in a language, but it's like, is this person like totally dependent on like code completion and that kind of stuff, or do they actually know the basic syntax of the language? Like that's not too much to ask.
Yep.
Um, yes, it is annoying to have to like close braces, I guess yourself, but like that's survivable, and it's a good test of like, has this person invested just like the basics and not just copy pasted their entire career and
I've
never
yeah,
built that like agility?
I've seen so many people be dependent on their tools to do things for them that they should know, right? Like, whether it's like too much auto completion, or too much snippets, or all that, or AI, or
Mm.
whatever it's going to be, they're
Oh
super
yeah,
dependent on that you take that away, and they have no idea what an array
yeah,
is, no idea how to traverse it, no idea how to move their file system. Like, the basics just fall apart. Like, if you and I were talking to a mechanic or a chef, and we say, hey, I would like you to change the brakes in the car, blah
yeah.
blah
Or like
blah,
chop an onion.
they know what to do, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Or like, I talk to a chef, like, oh, grab your knife, chop this onion, chop this carrot, blah blah blah. They can follow at the speed of that.
yeah.
Obviously, that's a physical activity that takes more time than just ls enter. But what I'm trying to get at is, they know those skills, those are fundamentals. They can move at that speed now, right?
Mhm.
Like, and so many of us in the software field, we can move the fastest because technology is so fast, and
Yeah,
we choose to move slow. You know what I mean? Like, listing files in directory takes zero point 0.5 seconds, right? Like, ls, boom, done. And
yes,
we still just like take too long to even understand that concept of what's happening. And
yeah,
then we go find tools or videos or whatever to help fill the gap. But the gap really is just learn what it is,
yeah.
like, just learn it.
Stop me if you've ever heard this on the internet. And I have been actually guilty of this once or twice, especially with regard to computer science, which I take very seriously now. Um, but, you know, oh, I can Google that. Why do I need to memorize LS or MV or RM or any of the concepts
Yep.
that build on those things when I can just look it up? But I think your example is much better transferring that as a metaphor to other skills. Like who wants to go to a chef who needs to watch a YouTube video on chopping an onion? Like,
I'm
no,
saying,
no, 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 no. How is he going to cook you the meal in less
when you
than
translate
27
that, yeah,
hours?
when you
Yeah,
translate that idea across fields, it just sounds bizarre, right?
yeah,
Like, I'm gonna go to a mechanic that's just gonna watch a YouTube video on how to change
yeah.
my brakes, or
Oh,
like
he's
how to
never
like
seen a
whatever.
car before. He's just gonna,
Come on, that just sound. I'm going
yeah,
to, not because you can memorize something, and not because you can reference something. I'm going to because you have experience, because you've learned something, and you can bring that to the table. The best developers or engineers overall that I've worked with are those that bring those experiences with them, and they can see beyond just a problem, right? If I ask you like, hey, I want to do XYZ, and you're like, oh, well, I've kind of done something similar in the past, and here's like a caveat you should be aware. Like they bring their experience with them and they
Yeah.
change the outcome, right? They don't just say like, oh, I'm gonna Google that, I'll search it up, see what the answer is, and use the first thing with no context. They bring that context with them, and it's not memorizing. I don't need you to memorize LS. I need you to learn it, right? I need you to
Yeah.
know it's a tool that you need to know when to reach for and how to use it, right? Like not something that you memorize, like, okay, every time I'm in a directory, I do LS memorize. No, it's a tool that you've learned to use. Just like, I mean, maybe I don't know if I should reference like screwdrivers and drills and stuff. Maybe not a lot of people even use those anymore, but like it's like those, right? Like actual tools that carpenters would use, right? You don't use a screwdriver to hang up your drywall. You're going to grab a drill because you've learned the different tools, you know your options, and you can choose the best one for the best scenario. And that as you like expand your knowledge, you add more tools to your tool belt, and you know like what when to use them for, and you can solve more complex problems, right? Like it builds up. But if you
Yes.
don't know the fundamentals, if you don't know the fact that a screw needs to be turned in order to drive
Yeah.
in, if you don't know the fact that CD can change into directory, you can't even get started on the complex things because you don't know the fundamentals.
Yeah. This is something I have uh like I was kind of referring to this earlier. I've been kind of guilty of this myself. And in one of the ways that I was guilty of it was specifically with regards to like data structures and algorithms. And if you don't know this, they're hard to learn the first time. A
Yeah.
lot of it's like really tricky. And you're like, and you need the trick. And I think what's especially unfair is like, you watch like a pro at anything else, and you can kind of like see how there might be tricks to it, but like you watch like an expert surfer or like an expert at pretty much anything, you see what they're doing, and you're like, okay, like if I got really good at the sort of physical skills, I can see how I would put that together. In our discipline, there's no it's sort of like 2020 vision looking back once you know something, but there are problems you simply cannot solve. Yeah, I mean, you'd be a genius who invented the algorithm a second time if you did, without knowing the trick. Like the algorithms
Yep.
are the trick. The trick is like how to think about them, how to compose them, how to then like adapt them. And that's what you end up doing. But it's like we have several hundred years to some extent of like mathematical and algorithmic tricks that we've come up with for doing certain things with certain mathematical guarantees of like how efficient they are. And just like it doesn't mean like I still strongly disagree with like the leak code interview, like how well someone has memorized like the delete operation in a
Yeah.
in a balanced binary tree, or like can you remember AVL rotations? Because I can't,
Nope.
and I never will be able to in an interview. Like I fundamentally understand what they are and that they keep a tree balanced, plus or minus one height,
Yep.
so that lookup
You
speeds are
have the
good enough,
concept.
and
Yep.
O of H is close enough to O of log n. But like I just can't do it on command. Like I can't implement that on command,
Right.
like the exact was it left right right or right right left or whatever.
I
So like
don't even
I
remember what it
still
is either. I just know that it's some weird
yeah, you
rotation that
gotta
floats
right.
things up. But yeah.
But like that's the part you Google. You can't just cop out. And I used to cop out and say, oh well, I'll just like Google like I don't know what to use that's like efficient for this problem. It's like, well, if you don't have any heuristic and you've never, like you said, learned the real concepts behind something or why or like what tools are out there, then you have no idea what to apply to a problem because the
Right.
problem's never going to fit perfectly. If you don't have any kind of mental model and understanding of how to apply what you've learned, this isn't just data structures and algorithms. It's also like, systems tools, like what's built into the operating system that you can
Yep.
leverage for this. Like what, using grep, like
I do
piping,
want to
you
I
can
want
get
to come
very
back to the
far.
systems tool stuff because that's the thing. I'm going to hold that point for a sec. But I agree
Yeah.
with you, right? Like there are certain tools that you just know how to use and you're familiar with them, and then there are other things that you are going to reference, right? Like to bring the analogy back to the mechanic or the contractor, the mechanic, like yeah, they know how to change your brakes, they know how to like flush the fluids or take the head of the engine off and like fix the internals, but they don't know the tolerances. They don't know the gap that a spark plug should have. They don't know like what spec things should be torqued to, right? Those are things that they reference. Same thing with a contractor.
Yeah.
They know the walls have to go up. They don't know like the specs for the 2x4s, how tall they should be or how wide they should have. Like they reference the blueprints for that, right? Like there is going to be that referencing, but I think the software industry, we've taken that to the extreme of like, we'll reference
Yeah,
everything. It's like,
yeah.
then why do I pay you? Right? Like honestly, like I'm not even trying to be mean. If you're just referencing everything, why are you here? Why am I paying you a salary? Like, not even to be mean or rude, but like honestly, think about that for a second. If you, what value are
I
you
mean,
bringing to the table?
that's 100% right. And I'm going to reference this because I think we'll talk about it later, but I want to get back to your systems tooling point. I have a theory on this that it is just an ugly outgrowth of the agile mindset, like taken to an extreme of like,
Yeah.
oh, we don't need that knowledge. Like, we'll just build a horrifically problematic MVP now, even though it would take no extra work to just like have more knowledge to begin with and then build something better as your first try. But
Agreed.
it's like that BS like business story that you hear about like agile of like, well, you don't need to know anything to start. You just build like something and then you'll adjust it to be good. It's like, how many fucking iterations do you want to do? Just hire some competent people first and you can cut that in half. Like,
Yep. Yep.
um,
Understand your
we'll
problem.
get
Yeah,
to that.
we'll get back to that point. But the systems tool, you're so right. Like people don't even know grep. They don't even know that grep exists, and they're struggling with logs, and like they don't know how to like parse them and like just find things. And they,
Yeah, like there's a trick for that.
yeah, it's there. Or
You just
like
have to know it.
JSON, right? JSON in the terminal. There's JQ, and you can use it, and you can do things with it. And it's like they just skip these tools entirely.
Yeah.
Part maybe right, maybe they don't know it exists, right? Maybe it's just a lack of like you don't know what you don't know, and that's perfectly fine. But like the people that do know and they don't reach for them and they work around it so much more difficult than they need to. Like
Yes.
I guess my message here is whatever system you're using, like learn it a little bit, study it,
Yeah.
see what it can even do, because I see so many people rewriting tools that have existed in like Unix environments for a while, right? Like,
Yes.
oh, I wrote this complex like parser that does kind of what ls grep and everything does in one. It's like, but do you understand why they were separated? Because now your
Yeah.
tool does 40% of what they do. It looks better, right? It's newer, it's modern.
For your one use case,
Functionality
it
is
works better.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like these tools were purpose built for a reason. And this whole Unix philosophy, right? Do one thing, do it well, and then chain these simple programs together to make those more complex to meet those more complex demands. It works, right? Like a simple cat to grep or a simple like, JQ or whatever, like it works. And it
It's the
just takes
original microservice.
right, the original microservice. It just
It's
takes a
like,
little bit of time on your part to just know that they exist and reach for them when needed. Like
yeah.
you know how many times I use sed to just do a find and replace or to do some
Yes.
substitution? And they're like, oh, I don't want to know regex. You use regex every day when you
Yeah.
do control
Yeah.
F. Like, what do you think is
Yeah.
happening here?
Yeah.
Like
You make a great point. That's one of my favorite points. There's a Steve Yegge post uh, from years ago. I don't think he writes much anymore, but he's a great programmer and a great writer about programming things. And one of his posts, God, this is like 15 years old, but I think, but it's called like hearty programmer food or like meaty programmer food. And it's kind of like the things he was at Google then, the things that he thinks are like really important and tests for in interviews. And of course, there's like the yes, you have to know how CS works, and
yeah,
yes, um, whatever. But one of them is actually specifically like Linux tooling, and one of the questions he asks is like sort of a sorting, filtering like question. Like if you know anything about Linux, it should feel very familiar.
yeah,
And he's like fails candidates. He says in this interview that he watches them write 2,000 line like C programs that just like exactly like you're saying, just like re-implement like find and grep badly together.
yeah.
And
Find
it's
all the
like
unique items in this file.
the
Great.
point
Sort
is
unique.
you know
Done.
how to
Like
use the tools. Yeah,
yeah.
right. But it's just like you said. It's like if you're using this environment every single day. I mean, it's like we are all sitting in essentially like spaceships of complexity that other people have built with this incredible built-in tooling. It's like learn to use the spaceship you're flying.
Yep.
Like just learn it. And all
Yep.
this shit that you hear like in these articles, like, oh, you know, um, like just because like Linux isn't a desktop operating system that everyone uses, like it's not worth learning, or like Linux, Unix, of course. I mean, just because new things are happening in computer science doesn't mean the old stuff is going away. There are articles sort of suggesting that every few years, like, oh,
Where do you
all the
think
CS
containers came
students
from? Like,
now.
yeah, all these people are
Exactly.
like, oh, Docker is a revolutionary thing. Bro, go back to the
Yeah.
1970s or 80s and go
Yeah.
look at root
That's exactly
like
right.
jails, right? Or
Sure.
Chroots or like LXC, LXD. Like,
Yeah.
go look
Change
at
root
those
jail.
things. They were there. The people in the 70s thought about this already. This is not a new
Yeah.
concept. It's just
Yeah.
was able to be modified and implemented like better over time. Like this is not novel. These concepts have existed and we ignore it, like
Yep.
and it's not just on the infrastructure side, it's on the software side too. I'm sure like I don't want to sound like we're salty towards all software because we're not, but when I first started learning programming, I had people that were experienced in programming like, bro, like you're missing this basic thing here. Like stop overcomplicating it. Just do a straight iteration here. And I'm like, oh, okay, I got it. And I had to be given that the same advice
Yeah.
I'm giving to people about Linux, like learning your tool. I had to sit down and learn my tools from software, right? And you mentioned before, some of those tools are the algorithms, just the basic algorithms, right? Just and your data structures. What is an array? What is a map? What is a stack? What is a queue? What do they do? How do you sort? Like learning those things are your fundamental tools. And that's how you solve more complex problems. And I agree that leak code isn't the best way to measure a candidate's proficiency with those things, but like it's what we have right now. It's what
Yeah.
the
That's
industry is
true.
kind of standardized on. And you know that going
Yeah.
in. So optimize yourself for it, right? Like
That's
go
true.
learn those things. That's one of the first things I did when I started transitioning over to development is in 2019, I took Harvard's CS50 course, which is their introduction to computer science, because when I went to school, I only studied IT and I didn't learn software, right? I just studied like networking, subnetting, basic system commands, and a little bit of SQL and one Java course that I hated. Um, so when I was transitioning over to software, I did Harvard's CS50 and I learned the data structures. I learned the algorithms. Now I knew them, right? I knew what an array was, I knew what a map was,
Hmm.
but I learned them, right? Like I learned them finally to the point where I knew what their benefits were, I knew what their trade-offs were, and I
Yeah.
knew how they were
Yeah.
they were
You'll
in
never iterate through a Python like list quite the same way,
yeah,
knowing the price you're paying each time.
exactly.
That it's
Exactly.
not just a pop. Right.
And like, yeah, once I learned more about dynamic arrays and like how they had to be resized under the hood, like nothing's for free, right? Like I learned the thing and now I can use that to build up my skills over time. And that was super helpful for me. And I didn't finish the CS50 course at first in 2019 because I was like, yo, this is way out of my league. And then in 2020, I was like, I'm gonna do it. And I finished it. It was hard
Awesome.
because they made you go and see it first and whatever. But I was so glad that I did
Ah,
it.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Similar experience with the MIT
Six double
6006
six. Yeah.
courses. There's a few years of them on YouTube. They're all excellent and they're all different. So it's like I'm actually going through another year now, kind of a second time,
Yeah.
picking up more things. And it's like I can't keep up with the math still,
Yeah.
working on it, but it's still just like been tremendously useful, and not just for theoretical knowledge or feeling smarter than other people at work or something, but it's like it genuinely solves. It helps me solve problems, and it
Yeah.
helps me know that the solution I've come up with is um,
Optimal or like more
optimal.
performant.
Exactly right. That's the word. I was looking for a different word, but it is optimal. Is like
Yeah.
I know the trade offs I've made. I know the cost of what I'm doing with the data here. I know like that this is taking advantage. Like I'm sequentially reading data off of something, so it's going to come out of like the CPU cache in
Yep.
one cache read. Like it just gives you Bill Kennedy calls it mechanical empathy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's an interesting
Mechanical sympathy or
sympathy.
empathy.
Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
empathy. I don't know if it's empathy. I don't know if I'm quite a machine, but yes,
I think it's
sympathy.
sympathy. Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's like I think that's an interesting idea, and that's it's like worth a lot if that just like comes to you as you're doing other stuff. Just keeps you from making mistakes that you would normally make.
I
I don't want to
agree.
harp on this too much, but yeah.
That's engineering, right? And that's what this field is. That's not just software engineering, but any engineering. That's what we do as engineers. We don't everyone likes to say, "Oh, I build things. Oh, I build things. Oh, I build." And it's like, great, anyone can build. Right? Like there's this quote that I read on one of the like engineering Reddits, but like it was more of like a construction engineering. And they were
Mhm.
like, any contractor can build a strong house, but it takes an engineer to build a house that barely stands, right? AKA they thought through the exact loads that were
That's
needed
great.
and blah blah blah, right? They made trade-offs and this and that. And like it was true. It was kind of like funny. It was kind of like quirky and funny, but it made sense, right? Anyone can build an API or a service or whatever,
Yeah,
but can you build one that's performant? Can you build one that scales? Can you build one that functions when it's under load? Like those are the things that where engineering starts to matter, right?
yeah,
And like you said, engineering is just having these engineering discussions to weigh the pros and the cons, right? The benefits and the trade-offs, because nothing comes for free. If you choose the array, you might get these benefits, but you're going to get these risks. You
yeah,
choose the map, you're going to get those benefits, but those risks. And like everything's a trade-off, and there's no like objectively correct solution for most of these big problems. It's more of a both will work. Here's what this provides, here's what that provides. And you have to
yeah,
choose one as an
yeah.
engineer.
You have to choose the one that fits your problem. And
Yep.
your problem also includes like what are other people on my team going to understand and want to deal with? Like how
Yeah.
sophisticated are we making this? Like how, like you said about the barely stands, it's like you are hopefully engineering to a kind of agreed upon spec. That's the idea. Where yeah, it's like, is it good enough? I think one of the very healthy things I've learned from being in the Go community is like premature optimization is very much frowned upon. Whereas in other languages, it's kind of like code golf is like a fun game or kind of efficiency optimization golf, where it's like if you're building something as part of a process that's going to take 3 nanoseconds in general to run, like that's the wrong place to optimize if you're doing something that takes 5 seconds to
Yep.
complete anyway. It's like go engineer or optimize something else, like keeping that kind of perspective where it's not just like, oh, like algorithms exist. We're going to use like a quad tree to deal with like a list
Yeah.
that's never more than five
We're gonna
items
do
long. It's like,
middle
okay,
out
well,
compression, bro.
yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. Yeah. Like hell yeah.
um,
Exactly.
I mean, look,
That was such a good
sometimes it's
episode.
fun. Sometimes like sometimes it's fun to do this, but like do this at home and not when someone's paying you.
Exactly.
I deal. You're gonna learn anyway, on someone else's clock. So like,
You brought up a really good point too about it's not just the technical discussion. It's will your team understand this code? Will is it work for your team? There's a people side of this too in your engineering discussions. It's
yeah,
not just use the map versus the array. It's people understand the array approach better on my team. And I have to
oh yeah,
take that into account too, because I'm not the
great
only
point.
one that's going to be reading this code. I'm not the only one that's going to be maintaining this code. I have a team of developers, and there is some average skill set among them all, right? There's some like average collection of
Yeah, the sort
skill.
of like mean
The mean, yep,
place that you are programming to. Yeah,
exactly. And that's the standard you need to be considering when you're programming features, right? Like
yeah,
you can't just say, oh, I'm going to use this complex quad middle out compression thing that only the top engineer in your team understands. And you
yeah.
can't also like keep it super simple where it doesn't solve the problem. There's like this mean area where you have to consider when you're choosing, implementations and whatnot and discussing them.
Yeah, I think exactly what you just said. There's like that reminds, I think, anyone who's worked with like a very smart but extremely toxic developer,
Yep.
like that's got to bring up memories, what you just said, because there is
Yep.
like, you can be completely right and also 100% wrong for like the actual solution in exactly that way of like building some hyper complex like thing that nobody understands except for you. And like, oh, you're such a genius for coming up with it. It's like, you don't build software alone. Teams build
Yep.
software. And if you aren't also building for your team to, you write it once, maybe. If you're good, you write it once,
Yeah.
but you maintain it 100 times. You add on to it, several times. You may
Exactly.
have to re-architect it. Do you have to fucking pull everything apart if you're going to re-architect it? Is it a huge pain? Um, yeah, and just like I think whoever said it, very famous computer person, and of course I'm forgetting it, but it's something to the effect of like, code should be written only primarily for people to read and understand, and only
Yep.
incidentally for computers to execute.
Oh yeah, I know the
These
quote. I don't remember who
Lisp
said it either.
people. In fact, it's probably in here.
It's
I'm gonna
probably one of
say
these. Like,
it's
yeah,
I'm gonna say it's Sussman, probably.
but yeah,
I
I
don't know.
remember that. And it's true, right? Like, do you think the computer gives a crap about your code? No, it's gonna execute. It's not gonna see any of that. It's
Yeah,
just
you
gonna
write it in
execute what you
assembly.
gave it.
Like no one
Yeah,
cares.
exactly. It
Exactly.
doesn't care. humans are going to be the ones reading it multiple times. You need to write your code like Bill
Yeah.
Kennedy says, right? It's make it easier. Like, don't make things easy to do. Make things easy to understand because the future people are going to have to read that and understand it. And if they can't understand it, how can they maintain it? You know? And like that's I've struggled with this. I like as I went into a senior engineer role, I've struggled with this. I've written code that I assumed that people would understand and they didn't, and they did not bring up the question, or they didn't let me know that they didn't understand it, and it moved forward. And then in the future when we had to maintain it, then it came up like, oh, I don't understand what's happening here. And it's like, wait, why didn't you bring it up before? And
Yeah, this is what
oh,
code
I
reviews are
wasn't,
for.
I was afraid to this and that, like, and it was just missed. And that's a shitty place to be in, both on my side as a senior side or more like
Yeah.
entry level people as well,
And on the other
because
side, yeah.
now we're in this position, like, this is out there, you don't understand it well, I didn't know you didn't understand it well, and I didn't like overly communicate what it's doing, and now we have to make up for
Sort of
lost time
stuck.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that sucks, and it's been a learning experience for me as well, you know.
That leads to a really interesting place, I think, which is sort of a combination of things I wanted to touch on. And maybe you have some good idea of how to like approach this in the conversation, but it's a sort of combination of we're talking about teams and team dynamics and how teams build things together. So that's kind of like process and people and that kind of thing. But and sort of like agile and all that, which we wanted to touch on, I know.
Yep.
But also, I think one thing that you said before, which is just worth pulling in somehow into this, is also like the organization you are in. If it's more than like one team, like if it's more than a startup of 5 people, the organization has to support kind of what you were talking about before, this idea of like engineering, not just building things, but engineering them. And that means um, it's not just the coders that are doing this. It's like management has to have this engineering approach, trying things, building to a spec, like managing to some kind of spec,
Yep.
improving things iteratively. Sales ends up being like that. Your education department ends up being like that. It's like everyone is engineering, even though only a few people, maybe half the company or whatever writes code. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with HashiCorp. And that
Yeah.
is one of the things that I've seen, I think to some degree unavoidably, kind of take a backseat from like the uh, the
The
organization.
scaling perspective and
But yeah,
yeah, I get you. Yeah.
yeah, we've 10x since we joined.
Yeah.
More since you.
Yeah. Yeah. When I joined, I think we were at 350 to 500 people, something along
Yeah,
those lines. Definitely
exactly.
under 500. And now what
You were
we're,
probably under 350 because I think I was still like
yeah,
362 or
exactly.
something like that.
And now we're over 2,500 people, right? Like that, yeah, that is almost about a 10x growth if you think about it, right? Like,
Yeah,
and it's things change as a result, right? There were people more in the past, and we touched on this last time in our audio list recording. Like startups generally have to be picky about who they hire, right? Because they have limited funds, they have time against them, right? They have to get time to market and get that product out there and
yeah,
show value. And that means they have to hire high quality engineers.
yeah.
Those high quality engineers are going to have engineering discussions, move quickly, blah blah blah, all that stuff. They
That
don't have
team
the
average is
yeah,
pretty high.
the team average is higher,
Um,
and they don't have the bandwidth to support someone that's new. They don't. They
yeah,
just don't have that bandwidth because they're in this go 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 mode. Eventually, companies get to a certain size where they can start bringing in people that are newer, which starts to like take the senior engineers have to move toward a mentoring approach and blah blah
yeah,
blah, and
totally.
that by definition will slow down velocity. It'll slow down engineering discussions, not because the junior engineers came in and ruined everything, and I don't really like to use
Yeah,
the word
exactly.
junior, I like to say like more early career or whatever, but not because they
Like
came
that.
in and ruined everything, but because if I'm going to help mentor you, I can't, if I'm focused on you, I can't be focused on that, and I can't do both
Yes.
things at once. So by definition, things are going to slow down, and that's okay. But it's as long as you're moving the average of the team higher again, and the senior engineers are pulling, and the more entry level engineers are asking questions and learning, and you're moving that average up, you're in a good spot. If you're not moving that average up, you're not going to have a good time
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Exactly. Um, that's a I actually love that average kind of metaphor because just as an idea, I think like I know Amazon and stuff have that as like, is this person a bar raiser? That kind of that stuff you can get a little religious about it. I think you can get a little bit like culture fitty with it too, like in a
I
bad way.
agree.
But I do think it's a useful kind of metaphor to keep in mind. Um, and that it is in fact, and this is like why I'm not like mad that HashiCorp got bigger. It was very good. We made money doing, it's like
Yeah.
it's good that that happened. It had to happen. But it is like everything else, an engineering kind of trade off that they did make consciously. I
Yeah.
mean, it has benefits too. Like it's, it can get pretty stale on a team with only seniors. It can
Right.
like just not
Yeah.
after a few years be a great like environment.
Right.
Um,
And
and
by
like
definition, seniors have to grow others. That's part of your role as a senior, is to not
right,
only ship great code, but to
yes,
up level your team. So like you can't
exactly.
up level a team that's already up leveled, right? You have to you need newer people that are
It's
less experienced. Yeah.
100%, and that really grows you. I think as a more experienced person, is teaching is some. I like really even just doing this YouTube channel and stuff has grown me just as much as it's benefited anybody else. It's like that is when you become more experienced, the way to get like a lot more gains is to like teach and mentor other people. So just from a selfish perspective, like you should have some juniors in there eventually,
Yeah.
so that your seniors don't get kind of stale and just start having like pointless arguments about
I
stuff.
agree. And then it makes those senior engineers better in areas that start to matter.
Yeah.
Writing, right? Pull request descriptions, RFCs, whatever,
Oh yeah.
teaching, documenting. They become better in these areas that really matter because they're forced to, right? Like you have to write things down better. Like my pull request descriptions when I first became a software engineer, they sucked. I was
Yeah.
just like, change file, right? Or
Yeah.
like edit this, and there's just
I
no
had one that always
description.
said I had what does what it says on the tin. Like
Right. Yeah.
descriptions, like the title's good enough, dude.
How does
Just
this make you
review it.
feel? Like a boss, right? Like, and I had those bad pull request descriptions, and now that I've became more like in a senior role and have to help other people and whatnot, my pull request descriptions are much better than they used to be, right? Like they don't just explain what's happening; they highlight the changes, but then they explain the decision making process behind it, right? Here's why I chose this approach. Here's what I thought of when I was doing it. So you can get into my mind a little bit and see like
Yeah.
the motivation, not just because the code changed. We could read the code. I could see what you did. I need to know why. And
Yeah.
that's what I've been trying to communicate more. And same thing with my RFCs. Like, why are we doing this? Why does this matter? Why are we choosing this approach over that approach? Like that has become so much better for me, like being in a senior engineering role versus when I was like just a software engineer, new in the career. I didn't know how to do any of that. And so there's that part for the senior side. But then for the non-senior side, if you're just getting into a software role and you're like, how do I up level? How do I do this? Ask questions. Right. I used to ping one of our principal engineers here at HashiCorp. I used to ping them all the time. Not like every day. But when I ran out of my depth of
Ryan Uber, I'm
troubleshooting,
your biggest fan. How
yeah,
do I become
Ryan
more like
Uber,
you
the
every
Evan
day?
Phoenixes of the world, right? Those. I would
Michael.
ping them and I'd be like, hey, I don't see what's going on here. Here's
Yeah.
what I have. Here's the code I'm working with. Like, I'm just missing something here. Clearly, can you help like run me through this? And they would. They would offer some time on Zoom. I'd get on the call with them, right? And like they would help me understand the code and I would up level. But that's because I sought them, right? They'd have no idea I was struggling if I didn't seek them out and ask questions. And I see like more new engineers in this field, they're afraid. They're afraid to be
Yeah.
vulnerable. They're afraid to ask questions. And it's like, not once was I treated like an idiot by these people and say, like, you suck, Matt. Like, they showed me because I didn't know what I
Yeah.
didn't know. And then, like, in my pull requests, when I gave them a pull request to review, they would request changes like 3 to 4 times before
Mhm.
getting the code in. And like I said on our audio list recording, at that point in time, I had a choice to make, right? When I received a review like that, it's like request change, request change, request changes. I
Yeah.
have a choice. I could either be like, oh my God, they hate me, my baby, my heart's broken, I suck as a developer, I should just go be a farmer and like cry about it. Or I can be like, this person is holding me to the bar that I want to be.
Yeah.
And this is great.
That's them lifting you into
Yeah, they are
that.
lifting me up
Exactly.
with this feedback. And I
Yeah.
chose to view it that way. And then over time, those pull requests, instead of requesting changes 4 times, it was 3 times or the 2 times or the 1 time. And then eventually I got to the point where I made a pull request and they approved it because it was great. And that's how
Damn.
I knew I grew,
Love it.
right? Like I clearly I grew because you pulled me up there and you saw my code. Now there was all those things that we've been talking about. I kept implementing them and learning and growing. And here's a pull request that is great. Like it just helped me so much in my career to do that when I was like not a senior. And now that I am a senior, I'm trying to do that for others. And it's hard. It's very hard. Communication's hard. All of it's hard.
Communication's hard.
And it's something that I've been working on slowly but surely. But I'm trying to do that as well for others.
That's great. Um, I'd like to segue kind of to the other portion because I really am excited to talk about the more like team processy things. I think you've touched on a lot of probably the most valuable parts, like
Yeah.
vulnerability, asking questions, admitting when you don't understand something. It's normal, by the way, to not understand like just about anything at the
You don't
beginning
know
when
what you don't
someone's
know.
explaining it.
Yeah.
Um, and um, communication, obviously, like getting your ego out of it, like always kind of seeking to like make sure other people are picking up what you're communicating. All great stuff. Um, but I want to know what you think about Agile and how companies do it. I'm going to poke the bear
Oh
with a
man,
stick
I
here.
don't know if we have enough time in this one to talk
This
about that.
isn't, for the record, this is not like HashiCorp specific here. We were talking about like basically every company we've ever been at and how both varying Agile implementations often are, and
Yeah.
how no matter what they are, what variation there is, they almost never seem to actually hit what we feel Agile is like trying to do.
Yeah, I we might have to bleed this one over into a subsequent video, but I'll
Yeah,
touch
we
on
can
it
go
just
deeper
briefly
into it. There you go.
because yeah, I have a meeting in like 5-10 minutes that I have to go to. But
Just try screaming to get the ideas out faster.
for real, it, I had never seen a company do agile or scrum correctly. Like they have the backlog, they have the sprints, they pull it in, blah blah blah. But like they're just the vision just always seemed off to me. Any company that I was at, right, HashiCorp or anything else, that I just the vision never seemed there. Like leadership has this vision that's supposed to trickle down into the organization, right, and make its way down. But then by the time it gets to the boots on the ground, right, us, the engineers, it's like kind of lost, and like it's never like I don't know. I think of like this vision or agile as like a sandcastle on the beach. You make it, it's beautiful, but then the waves start coming, right? They start eroding it, and you have to keep maintaining it, right? You have to keep putting the bucket on, reforming the castle, blah blah blah. I see vision like that. If you don't keep it up, people forget about it. It erodes away, and then that the code starts eroding away, and then the processes start eroding away, and that's what I've seen all these companies is great. You're doing agile, you're doing this stuff, you have the backlog, but where's the vision? And that's kind of been my problem. And that coupled with everyone being out of sync with one another. Product thinks about things one way,
Mm-hmm.
management thinks about things another way, engineering thinks about things another way, right? And we're all supposed to be on the
TPM,
same team, but like
right?
your idea of the feature is one thing, your idea of the feature is another thing, your idea of the feature is another thing. And it's just like, what are we building? Right? Like, what were we
I
building
agree. The
again?
the sandcastle idea is it's a pretty good metaphor. I think most really at most businesses, even sometimes very engineering focused ones like HashiCorp, that I think try to get like kind of business leaders in at the sort of higher engineering management layers that really know what they're doing, come from an engineering background. That sandcastle often is more like a grainy picture of like a lump in the distance at the shoreline, and that's
You
what
can
everyone's
tell it's a
just sort
beautiful
of like,
castle with a moat, sir.
yeah.
That is a lump of sand.
And that's like, right. But like the team has to kind of like look at it and be like, okay, like, okay, it's
If I
called a
squint,
sandcastle.
yeah.
So we probably should build what I think of as a sandcastle. And then everyone's like, yeah. And they're like, and this is another thing, like the more seniors you have on your team, the more this like emperor can go around naked, where you're like,
Yeah.
we know what we're doing, right? Like, we'll build a thing and then we'll do the other. And then someone's like, yeah, it should have like this, to make sure it's like pretty reliable. And everyone's like, yeah, let's just like build a structure. And
Yep.
that's building
It's like,
again and
sir,
not
I asked you to
engineering. It's
build a
like,
circle and you gave me a
yeah,
square, but it's a shape, right? Like,
yeah. We're talking about shapes, shape this, shape that. Why are you getting so upset about the shape? Um,
it's so
yeah,
true, though. It's so true.
but thinking of it, the vision as a process is a pretty interesting idea. Yeah, agreed. It's interesting because coming from like more operational teams like I have, um, the priorities, there's this unspoken rule, like every ops team now, right? Like if you're an SRE, it like operates under this like fake assumption that like we can do agile. Just like every sprint is going to have tickets added to it because like we also have to run the system and that's something we never planned for.
Yep.
So it's like well, we're ticketing, so we might as well. It's like rule one of like Scrum is like sprints are fixed. Like you schedule the work you're going to do and you do that. But it's like that really only works for constructing often like greenfield software cleanly. And
Uninterrupted work never flows with that. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
But
And like
that's like a reality. Like you
yeah,
do have to adjust it for that.
yep.
That's
And
um
in an infrastructure role, especially when the machine's out of disk space
yeah.
or a production issue happened, your
It's like
sprint doesn't matter
we
anymore.
stop
Yeah,
building features. Like
yeah,
that's
your
the
sprint
moment we stop.
is just a hopeful, like it's just a hope
Yeah.
at that point. And that's what I've seen happen to on the team I'm on now, is that we have some of these interrupt driven work come through, and it renders our sprint kind of useless. And like we try to have this agile sprint methodology, and like I think our biggest struggle right now, like here, is our backlog isn't clearly defined and groomed.
Mm,
So like there are times where engineers finish work ahead of time and they're like, what do I pick up next? And since
mhm.
the backlog is not groomed, it's not
Yeah.
clear what to pick up next. And then now you have an engineer is just kind of like
Like
waiting.
winging it
Yeah,
from
they're yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. They moved from runnable or they moved from executing to ready.
Scheduling.
Yeah, exactly. Like they moved over. And it's just wasted cycles. And it's just like sad to see. But what am I as an engineer supposed to do about that, right? I'm not responsible for like grooming the backlog or whatever. That's product and management. And like all of, I guess what I've seen is the core problem is that management, product, and engineering weren't always in the same room talking and aligned. And then
Yeah.
that caused all these other problems. So that's kind of my big thing about Agile. But I think it can be done well for teams that have clearly defined goals and minimum interrupt driven work. But teams that have a lot of interrupt driven work, I don't know if Agile is the place for you, right? Maybe just a well groomed backlog that you pick off of
Yeah.
one at a time, and and
Exactly.
and not really a sprint based thing, but more of like a round robiny thing, right? Like Dave, you're done with ticket X, great, go to ticket Y, right off the backlog. And
Yeah.
Matt, oh, you're done, you're still working
Or
on ticket B,
cover
like you're
emergencies for the rest of the day while everyone else gets their
exactly,
project work done. Yeah.
exactly.
Listen, you got to roll. Let's do this again soon. And for all the viewers who have questions, comments, or other topics they want to see us hit, please leave those in the comments below. We will
Yes.
have more of these conversations.
Oh yeah, no, we're
You
gonna
and I
talk
just
about
like
a lot of
talking.
things.
So,
We'll dive more into the agile stuff too, because we have a lot more to say about it. And I also want to talk about like salary reviews and stuff like that. I want to get
oh,
into
we
that
didn't even hit that.
discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. But
Let's talk. Let's talk about tech
we'll
salaries.
yes, I want to talk about that, the promotion, the tech salary, all of that crap. I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So we'll schedule again, and we have more things to do. But yeah, anyone who's listening and watching this and whatever, like just know like two things. One, we're not here to talk shit or be spicy or whatever. We're here to just be real, right? We want you to all
I'm here
see.
to be spicy, Matthew. I don't
Yeah,
know about you,
there's always gonna be a little spice when you're being honest.
but
But like we're here to show you the reality, right? To communicate
yeah.
the reality to you and not give you this like fluffed up, like overly edited video of like, oh my God, here's the best parts and none of the bad. Here's my Instagram photo, even though I took 700 of them that you didn't see. Like just show you what it's like to be in the room. And as Dave said, like tell us what you want to hear about. We have between Dave and I, we have a like vast like knowledge, right? Like we have systems level knowledge, software management level, all of this level knowledge that we have. Talk to us. What is something you struggle with at work, or something that you've been thinking about, or how do like problems that you have maybe trying to break into the field? We'll talk about it. We'll help you.
Love it. Well, I'll pitch this a little earlier next time. Sorry, but the the thing I wanted to point out is that you've made some really good videos on some kind of like it's funny because they're not even like the deepest of deep dives, but they're compared to anything else on YouTube, they're like deep dives
Yeah.
into interesting tech topics. So I'm going to link your channel below, and
Oh,
I
thank you.
encourage people
Yeah.
to check that out. Um,
Yeah, I suck
yeah,
at video editing, so I just kind of record live and throw it up there. So,
it's a feature.
eventually I
It's a
should
feature,
probably
not a bug, dude.
I should
It's a
probably
feature.
figure out how to edit or something, but I
Yeah.
have things to say and things to cover. I just don't always have time to clean it up.
I
So,
thought the video was the one that I watched was it was like pretty focused actually,
oh,
and
thank
kept
you.
me engaged the whole
I've
time.
been
So
trying to get better. Little, not really a script, but little notes and stuff, and
that's
keep
the way.
myself on
Yeah,
track.
notes.
So we're getting there.
Cool.
But yeah, thank you again. Thank you for having me. Let's schedule it
See you
again.
soon.
And we'll keep chatting. We have so many things to cover.
So much to talk about. So you wouldn't know it, but we actually do this like every week. But we
Yeah.
still have this much to talk about.
Well,
So
that's the thing. Like Dave and I have been meeting weekly for months now. I don't even know, very long time now.
long time.
And we tend to talk about all these cool topics. And we're like, you know what? We should just record what we talk about and post it, because there's some really good stuff that comes up here. And this is that. So you're welcome.
You're welcome,
You're
world.
welcome.
Now you can contribute and be part of it. So yeah,
Yes, exactly.
cool.
But
See you
awesome,
next
man.
time.
Thank
Thanks
you
for doing
again.
this, man.
I will
Appreciate your
see
time.
you. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Later.